Some people think that Trillium is impossible to grow. And while this isn't true, it is one of the easiest native plants to mess up if you don't know what you're doing. Today, we're going to talk about some of those common mistakes that I see gardeners use and how to successfully get your Trillium to flower in the spring. Stay tuned and we'll walk you through exactly how to do it. Hey guys, it's Anna from Bright Lane Gardens, and today we're talking about Trillium. Specifically, we're talking about how to get from this tiny rhizome to that stunning three-petaled flower that you love to look at on your woodland walks in the spring. So first things first, Trillium is a native woodland ephemeral plant. Ephemerals, of course, referring to our spring bloomers. These guys shoot up first thing in the spring, no matter how cold those temperatures are. Sometimes you'll even see them sprouting up through the snow here in northern Michigan. They take advantage of the fact that the woodland floor is actually getting access to some of that sunlight because the deciduous trees above it have not yet leafed out, allowing that sunlight to go ahead and hit the woodland floor. While we do have a lot of woodland ephemeral plants here in northern Michigan, Trillium does stand out for several reasons. It's hugely popular. People love that beautiful white three-petaled flower on it, and it's notoriously hard to grow. It grows very differently from a lot of the other spring wildflowers that we're used to. Now, Trillium grows a lot differently than a lot of the spring woodland flowers that we're used to. Trillium doesn't rely on wind or birds to spread its seeds. It actually relies on ants. This is a process known as myrmecochory. I had to actually write out that pronunciation because it's such a long word. Myrmecochory is the process of seed dispersal via ants. Each Trillium seed has a small fatty deposit on it called an eleusome. This actually attracts the ants to these seeds because the ants view that as a food source. So they go in search of these seeds looking for those fatty deposits, and they take these seeds with them to harvest that fatty deposit. Once that fatty deposit is harvested, they discard the rest of the seed, which is the actual seed, and it will grow from there. The advantages of this are, of course, the fact that A, the seed is getting further away from its parent plant, which means less competition for both plants, and B, there's typically a nice rich soil in that area since these ants tend to live in these woodland biomes, and that's an ideal location for the Trillium seed to germinate. So these seeds get planted in protected, nutrient-dense soil in the woodland biome, which is exactly where they want to end up. And the ants then will leave the plants alone to germinate over the next several years. And I mean it when I say over the next several years. So let's talk about why it's so difficult to start a Trillium from seed. Trilliums are notoriously hard to grow from seed. One of the reasons for this is they require a double dormancy period. Now, a double dormancy period is exactly what it sounds like. So essentially this seed requires a warm period followed by a cold period followed by another warm period followed by another cold period in order just to germinate. And that's a crazy long time. So double dormancy, think warm plus cold stratification. If you are interested in learning more about the double dormancy process, it's not something I'm going to review on this video today, but I have done a video on this in the past. So definitely check out the linked video above so you can learn more about double dormancy native seeds. Here we have just a few native Trillium seeds. Now, these seeds are quite expensive if you buy them from seed, so you want to make sure you're taking care of them. These need to be refrigerated from the moment you receive the seeds until you're ready to start your double dormancy stratification. If I could suggest one thing, it would be to direct sow these guys in the fall so that you don't have to deal with mimicking this process indoors. So here's our seeds. They're relatively small. You can see everything's kind of encased in this almond shape, almond colored seed pod here. If I had to recommend a process for starting Trilliums, it would not be to start them from seed. But I totally understand the desire to start a plant from seed and watch it go through its entire life cycle. So if you are dead set on starting your Trilliums from seed, I strongly recommend direct sowing in the ground instead of trying to mimic this process indoors because the seed is so particular and it's easy to wreck the effort that you've already put in simply by forgetting to take it out of the fridge, take it out of the warm environment, or water it. So direct sowing the seed outdoors in the correct area is going to be key to your success. And while we're not going to specifically go through that process today, here's a high-level overview of what that's going to look like. First things first, you need woods. Trillium likes to live in the woods. It's really unlikely that it's going to thrive in any other biome, no matter how much you try to amend that soil. So do yourself a favor and plan on planting these along a wood line, along the edge of your woods, or along a trail or path. You're going to direct sow your seeds in late summer or early fall. There's still going to be a little bit of heat left. This is that first layer of warm stratification, and it's going to go straight into your winter. So go ahead and plant these seeds, likely under a tree or under the canopy of other trees, and you'll go ahead and sow those into the soil. Allow this stratification to take place. You put in all this effort, you direct sowed at the right time, you went through a full winter. The following spring comes around, you go out there and there is nothing to look at, and that's okay. That's exactly how it's supposed to be. So in that second season, we are only focused on root development. The Trillium will not shoot up a single leaf above the soil. You will not see anything. You will see no signs of success. This is frustrating, but you have to leave it be. Here's what not to do. Do not try to dig it up. Do not try to replant it and crowd that plant out. The single only thing that you can do is wait at this point. So we get to the end of summer, we're at the end of our second warm period, we're going into our second winter. This is another cold period. This thing has to be stratified by now, right? So we get to the following spring. This is 2 full years after you first planted those seeds. So it's been a little while. If all has gone exactly according to plan, after 2 full years, you will finally see your first leaf emerge above the soil. And likely that is all you're going to see. If you see 2 leaves above the soil, you had a great season and you're very fortunate. So 2 full years later, we're only seeing 1 leaf. All is still good. This is exactly how it's supposed to go. How much longer until we see a flower? Believe it or not, 5 years is on the early end. 7 years is average, and beyond 7 years is still not uncommon with these flowers. So if you are insistent on planting these guys from seed, go for it. I strongly recommend trying it. It's so fulfilling. Just know you're going to be waiting quite a few years before you're rewarded with your very first flower. Now, moving on to the segment that we're actually focused on today, we are planting up from rhizomes. This is what a Trillium rhizome looks like. So it looks a lot like your rhizomes that you would see on your lily plants, on a lot of other different types of crops. It grows in a really similar manner as well. Now, keep in mind, this rhizome is going to grow very slowly, just like the rest of the plant does. So if you were hoping to plant your mother plant via seed and harvest a colony or divide a colony in just a few years, you're very mistaken. It's going to take you well over a decade to form a colony of these in your yard. We do have colonies of these. That's where these come from. We very rarely plant our Trilliums from seed because it takes so long to get to a mature plant. But dividing colonies is actually a successful way to propagate these plants as long as you're doing it cautiously and not over harvesting. So these were harvested from colonies. You're going to divide these really similar to how you divide a lot of your lily plants. A lot of your other plants that do grow via rhizome, you can divide these in a similar manner. Do not over harvest. That's certainly my most important tip when it comes to dividing up these colonies. So here's our rhizome. This guy is going to grow horizontally. So you can see this rhizome down at the very bottom. This is our fresh growth for this year, and this rhizome is going to continue to grow horizontally. These don't typically get too deep in the soil, so we want to keep that in mind when we're planting our Trillium plants as well. This rhizome, this horizontal rhizome down below, should only be about 1 inch or 2 below the surface of the soil. And when you have a sprout like this, it's really easy to see. So the soil would come up to about right here. This top inch or so is what would show above the soil, and this bottom inch or so is what would be tucked below the soil. This rhizome is what's going to continue this colony and enable more plants to sprout up alongside this initial plant. So we're actually going to be potting up these rhizomes into containers so that we can sell at our native plant nursery in May. It's currently late March. This is a great time to plant these up because they're still in their dormancy, but starting to show some signs of life. We're going to plant them up into a nursery container, let them grow a little bit, and then we'll sell them in May. And hopefully some of you that are watching this video right now are the proud new owners of some of these Trillium plants. When you're potting up your Trillium plants, the single most important thing to consider is going to be your soil. And this is one of those plants where you really can't out-science the plant. So we can't come up with a recipe that's ideal for these Trillium plants. Our best case scenario is to use what nature's already created and grab some soil from its natural biome. So this is a part of the woods that lines our property. This is a nice mix of pine trees and deciduous trees, which is an important categorization because you don't want to get soil from an exclusive row of pine trees. This soil is likely to be a little too acidic for these plants. Pine needles are naturally acidic, so you want to make sure that you're getting a nice blend of these deciduous trees and pine trees, or working with an exclusively deciduous forest. So we have a nice blend, I would say about 50-50. This is actually a compost pile where we've dumped a lot of debris from the plant nursery in the past. This has a lot of really rich organic soil and of course gets a nice layer of both dead pine needles and dead leaves every single fall. So it has a really nice biome to it, and it has all the microbial structures that the Trillium plant is going to need to succeed. So we're going to harvest some of this compost pile, put it into a bucket, bring it in and mix that in with our usual soil mix, and from there we'll go ahead and pot up our Trillium plants. I'm going to give this a really nice mixing. There's a lot of bigger chunks in here. So we have a lot of whole leaves that aren't chopped up at all. We have definitely some roots in here. There's a couple acorns that have hitched a ride and some smaller sticks. So most of this debris is fine. If there's any larger rocks in here, I'm going to pick those out. If there's any larger sticks that are really going to prevent my roots from spreading well, I'm going to pick those out. But otherwise, we like this organic material. This is really good for our Trillium plants. The next thing we want to consider is the size of our container. So even though this little rhizome, which is actually a decent sized rhizome that I've harvested, this isn't that big, but when you look at this container and we're thinking, okay, we're only going to plant it an inch or two below the surface of the soil, that means the rest of this container is going to go unused. But that's exactly what we want. We want a nice buffer of unused soil around that rhizome, because when it comes to transplanting the Trillium, you want to disturb those roots as little as possible. So I want your ears to perk up if you've purchased one of our plants. You purchase them in a gallon-sized container. Usually when I'm saying to transplant plants, I like you to get your fingers in those roots, tousle those roots, mix up that soil, encourage those roots to spread out the moment they get in the ground. That is absolutely opposite from what I want you to do when you're planting a Trillium. The goal of planting a Trillium is to disturb those roots as little as possible. So we're going to fill this up with soil. I'm going to plant this guy an inch or two deep. I'm going to leave it be, let him do his thing. And when you're ready to transplant this over the summer months, you want to literally flip this container over, hold on to that soil ball, disturb it as little as possible, and stick it directly into your hole without moving much of the soil around those roots. Hard to do, but well worth the patience, because your plant will have a much more successful time establishing if you don't disturb that soil. I've filled up my container almost completely with my soil blend. We can see some pine needles and some leaves sticking out there. That's totally fine. That's exactly what this guy would have out there on the forest floor, so that's perfect. Next, we're going to make a very slight divot for where our rhizome is going to sit. If he's sitting nicely right on the surface of that soil. And then I'm just going to take a little bit of my finer material and give him about an 1.5 to 2 inch layer right on top of that rhizome. Now you can see the top of my Trillium plant is sticking out about 1 inch to 1.5 inches. None of my rhizome is showing through that soil there, and I didn't compact the soil on top. I left it nice and loose so this guy can take his time spreading out in that soil. This guy is officially planted and he's ready to grow. Now we are not putting these back outside. We're keeping these in the greenhouse to force them to sprout because it's a little warmer in here, and it gives us a nice large plant when it comes to our opening weekend. But we do want to make sure that we're keeping this guy out of the sun. So this guy here is actually going to go underneath of these tables so that he has a nice canopy of shade. Typically, some morning sun is totally fine for your trillium plants. If they get a couple hours of sunshine early in the morning, as that sun's starting to rise, that's fantastic, but then we definitely want shade for the rest of the day. Trilliums are sensitive to sunlight. They're very sensitive to heat, so we want to make sure that it's not getting too warm out here. And we also want to make sure that we're keeping a consistently moist soil. I want you to think about the soil that you would have out in the woods. So our woods have a nice canopy of trees that give it shade. It's also usually got a nice layer of leaf litter on the bottom there. So that soil, if you were to lift up that leaf litter and look underneath there, it would be nice and moist. It would not, however, be soggy wet because of all the trees around it to soak up that water. So think about that when you're thinking about how moist you want to keep your trillium plant. We want to make sure that that soil is staying nice and moist, just like it would out there in the woods, but we definitely don't want any water being held close to those roots. If you're planting this in the ground, location matters just as much as how you plant it. Trillium grows naturally in deciduous forests, so it gets sunlight early in the spring before the trees leaf out, and then it's shaded for the rest of summer. This is exactly what you want. The soil should be loose, rich in organic matter with lots of decomposing leaves and even some dead pine needles. Moisture should stay fairly consistent in the spring, but it's okay if things do dry out a little bit once the plant goes dormant later on in the summer. If you're looking for an ideal place to plant your trillium plants, you want to go under a deciduous tree. Look for something under a maple, oak, or beech tree, and you want something that's going to get some sun earlier in the morning that will gradually turn into shade for the remainder of the afternoon. Typically, these areas will get that early morning sun earlier in the spring, but by the time summer comes around, the leaves around that tree will prevent any sunlight from hitting the ground. So a little bit of early morning sun earlier in the season, followed by full shade once you get into those hot summer months, is ideal. When it comes to the ideal soil, typically amending soil will actually make matters worse when it comes to trilliums. These guys thrive in woodland soil that's usually untouched by humans, so we want to keep it as untouched as possible. We want something that's rich in humus, compost, pine needles, or leaves, rich in organic material, and stays consistently moist due to the nature of the shady trees, along with the absorption of excess moisture from those roots. So when you're looking on your property, you want to look for an area that's relatively untouched by you. You don't want these in a traditional flower bed. You don't want them in a raised garden bed. You want these in undisturbed soil out by the woods. Try to avoid areas that tend to get a lot of leaf pileup. So if there's an area up against a wall where leaves tend to blow on top and have a really thick layer, we want to avoid those type of areas. We also want to avoid any areas that have been hard packed. So if it's along a trail or something that's been driven on by a snowmobile or an off-road vehicle, we want to make sure we're avoiding hard, compacted areas. We want light, loose, humus-rich organic soil, and that's typically found most easily in our woodland settings. Lastly, we want to plant these in small clusters. Usually 3 to 7 plants is ideal for starting a nice colony out in the woods. We do want to try to start a colony because that's what mimics the natural conditions of trilliums most successfully, and that's where you're going to get the best establishment from all of your plants as a uniform whole. Pro tip, if you are not able to plant your trillium plant right away, put a nice little layer of dead leaves. You can even rip them up a little bit, but put those as a mulch on top of your soil, and that will really help your soil retain some of that moisture while also keeping up with that natural cycle. One really important note to consider is deer traffic. Deer actually love to nibble on these trillium flowers. On a young plant that you've just planted or on a fresh seedling that's finally emerged from the soil, this can be devastating to that plant. So if you are trying to establish a new colony of trilliums out in your woods, if you do have that heavy deer pressure like we do around here, you're going to want to protect your plants. I won't do it in this video, but in a future video, I'll show you how I build a little cage over top of my young woodland plants. And it's really just sticks and chicken wire, super easy, but it does keep those deer from nibbling on those plants. And you have to keep that up for the first couple years. Once your colony has successfully established, It's still likely that your deer are going to nibble on some of those plants, but once the colony has successfully established, then it's a lot more resilient to having some of those early spring nibbles. Of course, once the rest of the plants come alive around it, the pressure from these deer is actually a lot lower. Trilliums aren't really a tasty plant for them. They just happen to be one of the first available plants and the first available little snippet of green that the deer come across in the spring. Before we end, I'm going to review a couple common mistakes to avoid. So first and foremost is your planting depth. We want to make sure that we're keeping that rhizome 1 to 2 inches below the surface of the soil. So if you're planting a potted plant, make sure that you're keeping the surface of that potted plant in line with the surface of your soil. Don't plant that guy any deeper. We also don't want to compress the soil. There is no need for us to compress that soil or pack it down around those plants. We want to keep it nice and loose, allow that organic breakdown cycle to continue to take place over top of it, and enable those roots to spread out. Trilliums are a shade-friendly plant. Embrace this. Don't try to force them in the sun. Too much sun or too much heat will kill your plant or at minimum stunt the growth. So you want to make sure that your plant's only exposed to a little bit of morning sun, but definitely shady conditions for the rest of the afternoon. Last but not least, do not disturb the soil. Once you have your trilliums in the ground, even if it seems like they're not coming up or they're growing really slowly, don't try to dig this plant up. It will almost absolutely spell out demise for that rhizome. So avoid that urge to dig it up and plant it somewhere else. Just let it be and see if you will successfully grow into something else. Along those same lines, if you want to plant companion plants with your trillium, plant them at the same time that you plant your trillium. Do not go back a few years later and try to plant something alongside your colony. This disturbed soil is likely to upset the natural growth that you've already established with your trillium rhizomes. Trillium is not impossible to grow, but it is a plant that requires you to slow down and observe the way it grows in nature so that you can mimic those conditions in your own yard. Once you successfully get your plant to flower, it is one of the most rewarding experiences you can follow through to the end. Before we sign off today, I want to remind you guys that Bright Lane Gardens has a monthly email newsletter. Once a month, we send out native gardening tips, design ideas, and highlight native plants that grow well and are ecologically valuable to our surrounding ecosystem. This is a free newsletter to sign up for, and we never send any spam. Click the link above or below to sign up for Bright Lane Gardens monthly newsletter today. That's all I've got for my video. If you are a customer of Bright Lane Gardens and you have planted your trillium plants, don't ever hesitate to reach out with any questions that you might have. We love to support our customers while they're here in the store and long after they bring their plants home. As always, thank you so much for spending time on our channel today. It sure does help out small businesses like ours. I hope to catch you next time. Bye-bye.